Presented by Mortgage Right. I'm your host, John Sarandidis, and as always, I'm joined by my partner, Kevin Stone. Adam Kirkshin is on assignment tonight, but we do have the good fortune to be joined by the Boston Globe's Chris Price. Chris, first things first, thank you for taking the time, my friend. We greatly appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, guys. I have a lot of respect for what you guys are doing at New England Football Journal. It's easy to kind of helicopter in and cover the Patriots stuff, just kind of, from week to week. But what you guys do on all three levels, high school, college, pro, it's really, really impressive. So I have a lot of respect for the job you guys are doing.
Well, thank you, Chris. It means a lot coming from you. We have a lot of respect for you. And I will say this, Kevin will agree with me on this. To watch you guys that have been on the beat for a while work on a day-to-day basis, it's a learning experience for us. We get to learn how to be pros and do the job. So we really appreciate that, that sentiment and your thoughts there. And back at you, a longtime fan of your work. So I'm glad now that, we can call you a Patriots beat colleague.
Thank you.
Before we get started here, I do want to remind you that if you're in the market to purchase your next home or purchase your first home, give our good friend Herb Devine a call, 781-254-2846. You can also email him at herb@mortgageright.com. With 27 years of experience, he has the know-how to help you get into your next property. He and his team are available anytime, including nights and weekends, so call or email Herb today. All right, Chris, obviously big day on the docket tomorrow, of course. It's the one joint practice this summer that we're going to get between the Patriots and the Philadelphia Eagles. Of course, the Eagles are in town on Thursday night for preseason game number 2. Just some thoughts on that. I think we can say after 13 practices, it's going to be a welcome change to the day-to-day grind of training camp.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. Joint practices, in my experience, can get a little chaotic, but in the best possible way, because there's, you guys know at training camp, there's 18 things you got to keep an eye on. Now there's double that, because you never know if there's a backstory between a player on the Patriots and the Eagles, and there's going to be some trash talking going on. I do think it was wise on the part of Mayo, and maybe Nick Sirianni agreed to this. I have to imagine he agreed to this, to limit it to one, because I was in Green Bay last year, and the second practice was absolutely counterproductive. There were fights every 5 minutes. Things were getting chippy. And so to limit it to one practice, it's going to be fun to be able to see this Patriots team, to see how they measure up against one of the best teams in the National Football League on both sides of the ball. So, we have this preconceived idea as to how the Patriots have done so far this summer, but it'll be fun to see how they stack up against a team like Philadelphia.
And Chris, to that point, my first year, the Carolina practices, there were fights, I believe, both days. So it's
we were both there.
Yeah, it's an absolute cluster sometimes. The biggest question for me, and obviously for everybody, is how much do we see of Drake May tomorrow? And I'm curious because usually, the preseason game is more for that second guy, and the one kind of gets all the reps in the practice. But do you feel like it's going to be sort of split up tomorrow? That might be the biggest question of them all to me. I'm hoping we see a lot of May, but I feel like we might get a lot of Jacoby.
I agree with you. I think we're going to get a lot of Jacoby. What I want to see specifically from Drake May is I want to see Drake May behind the starting offensive line, or at least a reasonable facsimile of the starting offensive line, to see how that group meshes. I talked to Jacoby Brissett about this today for a story I'm doing probably around about the end of the week. I'm fascinated about the relationship between the quarterback and the offensive line that has to develop over time, not just the quarterback in the center. Obviously, those guys have to work very, very closely on an extended basis. But as the quarterback, you have to know the strengths and weaknesses of the guys around you. You have to be aware of what your offensive line can do and can't do. And the only way you can get that is through reps. We know what Jacoby Brissett can do with, again, a reasonable facsimile of the starting offensive line. I want to see Drake May in there. I also want to see Drake May, obviously. This is something that I think kind of goes without saying, but it's important to mention in this context. I want to see Drake May under duress. I want to see what happens to Drake May when he has to consistently convert on 3rd and long. I want to see what happens to Drake May when they do some shuffling with the offensive position guys, the offensive skill position guys. One of the things about Mac that, my enduring memory of Mac is Mac needed everything around him to be perfect. He needed, every starter in place. He needed the offensive line to be healthy. He needed the running game to click. I want to see if Drake May can handle that. And I think we're going to get a sense of how's he going to perform when things aren't all perfect around him. But ultimately, to answer your question, the thing for me, I want to see Drake. I want to see a lot of him over these next couple of days. And I want to see him behind the starting offensive line to see how he feels back there with that group.
Chris, speaking of Drake May, were you surprised that he only played a series on Thursday night? It seemed to me, just talking to folks at camp, a lot of people were surprised that he only played that one series. I would include us in that. Were you surprised that he only played one series and went 2 of 3 on Thursday night?
Yeah, and you guys know what it's like in the press box during a preseason game. You kind of, a quarterback goes out and you expect to start collating the stats and the numbers and tweeting out the performance. And when he left after that first series, I thought, well, we're going to have another series or 2, maybe 3. He's going to play a quarter or something. Right. So we will have time to kind of go through the numbers and see what they look like. Of course, he just, he's yanked and Bailey Zappi comes in. And so, yeah, I was, John, I was surprised. And I would have liked to have seen more of him. Now, I know that you could say, well, the offensive line isn't really ready. And, you don't feel good about putting your quarterback back there if the offensive line. Well, again, that goes back to my point before. I want to see him kind of sweat a little bit. I want to see him kind of think on his feet, kind of figure things out as you go. And this is the best possible time to do it, the preseason. So, yeah, I was surprised that he did not play as much as he did. I'm surprised he didn't play more, put it that way, on Thursday night.
With that being said, you have to think that on Thursday night he's going to play a quarter. I mean, I think this is the all-important second preseason game. You have to think he plays a quarter, right? I mean, yeah. If he doesn't, and I thought you brought up a good point too, we need to see him with the ones. But if he doesn't play a quarter, then you have to start to wonder, okay, are there things going on in the background that concern them and they're not putting him out there and they're not exposing him to NFL caliber defenses? Because whether the Patriots like it or not, or whether even Drake May likes it or not, people are going to look at the weekend he had, and they're going to look at the weekend that the other 5 first-round quarterbacks had, and they're going to say, well, those guys played and they excelled. Why isn't he getting that same opportunity? Why isn't he allowed to excel?
I'm glad you added the conditional statement there where you say, look, it's different for different quarterbacks. Caleb Williams, JJ McCarthy, all those guys. And I think it's important, when we're talking about this, to note that, look, it's different offenses, different teams at different stages, different quarterbacks at different stages of their development. That being said, you got to play the kid more. You do. You have to play the kid more. And look, I understand if we're going into a season here where Jacoby's going to play the whole year. I get that. Look, Elliott came from a place that perfected the art of sitting the rookie quarterback all year, maybe waiting too long to pull the trigger on a guy. But if you're going to figure out if he can play or not, this is the time to do it. And I think you're going to see a really good Philadelphia defense come in here. No disrespect to the Panthers, but this is going to be a better test for the Patriots on both sides of the ball than what we saw last week against Carolina. The joint practice in the game. It's going to be a really good test for this group. And I want to see if the kid can play. I want to see if he knows what to do when things start to break down around him. I understand the whole argument about the offensive line and not, kind of waiting on that. And I know that, look, part of it is tied to the rest of the offense. You don't want to put him out there if, you don't feel like he's going to do well and he's going to, you want to basically have, and I've used this analogy before, you want to have a clear runway for the kid because you don't want to pull the trigger. And look, I'm looking down the road. You don't want to pull the trigger and then have to pull him from the game and put Jacoby back in because then you got a Zach Wilson kind of situation. So I understand, preaching patience, but I want to see the kid this week. I want to see what he can do against the Eagles.
So to that point, excuse me, the one thing I worry about is in practice, you're not getting hit. So do they maybe give him more reps tomorrow and say, we know we can control it. And Thursday, we don't have to worry about him being dragged down from behind. Mm-hmm. But then you have an entire stadium saying, well, what the hell? We're not seeing him again. Did you feel like that may play a factor into it?
I think that makes a lot of sense, Kevin. I really do. That if you're going to load him up with snaps tomorrow, if you're going to have him not take reps ahead of Jacoby, because I understand the pecking order, but if you're going to ultimately give him more reps than Jacoby, let's say, I think that makes a lot of sense. Look, I don't, I don't know what would happen to Gillette Stadium if we saw more Bailey Zappi than, Drake May on Thursday night. I don't think they'd be too happy. But look, one way or another, whether it's tomorrow or whether it's Thursday, you gotta give him extended reps. And again, maybe, Kevin, to your point, which I think is a really good one, that maybe you load him up on Tuesday and you have him play a lot on Tuesday in a controlled situation, in a controlled environment, as opposed to game action on Thursday night.
You are watching / listening to the New England Football Show presented by Mortgage Right. I'm your host, John Sirenitas. As always, I'm joined by Kevin Stone. And this week we are joined by the Boston Globe's Chris Price. Just a reminder, if you are in the market to sell your current home and purchase your next home or buy your first home, give our good friend Herb Devine at Mortgage Right a call, 781-254-2846. Or you could shoot him an email at herb@mortgageright.com. He and his team are available anytime, including nights and weekends. Well, it's going to start getting busy for Herb now with Scituate High School football kicking off, but I promise you he'll still be around plenty, so reach out to him if you need to. Chris, you did mention the offensive line earlier, and once again, they are under the microscope, and it seems like we've been talking about the offensive line for about 4 years now and some of the turnover and the issues, but the last couple of years have not been very good to this group. I got the sense that we're kind of in the same boat as we were a year ago, where we're sitting here trying to figure out what are the different combinations going to be, who's starting, who's not, do they have a left tackle? As it stands now, it doesn't look like they do. Just some thoughts on the offensive line. Are we in a similar boat than we were a year ago? Or do you think that this group is a little further ahead and maybe the offensive line might not have some of the struggles that they've recently had?
I think they are, and people who are watching, people who are listening aren't going to get this, but I think they are like that much better than where they were last year.
Yeah,
last
I would
year,
agree.
and you guys remember it now, man. Last year was just an apocalyptic run, just an absolutely awful run of poor play, bad health, poor coaching. It just went on and on and on and on and on. I had someone tell me that fundamentally James Ferentz was coaching the offensive line at the end of the year, which is great because he's a really smart guy, and he went on to become a coach with the Giants this year. But when you put everything into the conversation, it was just awful from the start. And I don't know how much of it is on Adrian Clem. I don't know how much of it is on, Bill and the personnel moves and all that. Maybe it's a combination of everything, but it couldn't have gone any worse for that position group last year than it did. When you consider everything. Look, we even talked about Trent Brown's situation. I think that this is a group with a relatively positive ceiling. When you look at this line, when you look at Caden Wallace, when you look at Layden Robinson, you look at some of the next level guys. I'm not talking about the starters. I feel pretty good about the group that they have on the interior between City and David Andrews and Michael Wenyu. And this is maybe a conversation for another day. David Andrews goes down. This team, this offensive line is in a little bit of trouble, quite frankly. Nick Leverett's good, but after that, they have no one who can handle a shotgun snap for to save their lives. You got to fix the tackle situation. And I've talked to a lot of people around the league, to your point, John, they don't have a quality left tackle right now. And I think they would love it if Okorafor came in over the next couple of weeks and just seized the job and said, look, I'm your number one guy. I am your left tackle for the next couple of years. I haven't seen that so far. And maybe Caden Wallace is the guy. Maybe Caden Wallace grows into that role. I wonder, and I think it's reasonable to start this conversation, is this a better team with Michael Wenyu at left tackle? Because you do have Cole Strange coming back. And Cole Strange, I think, is a quality interior lineman. And so you can put him at one of the guards. Maybe you flip City over to left guard, or I'm sorry, to right guard. You still kind of have problems with the right tackle position. But, maybe that's the answer to the whole thing. Because once you slot that left tackle in, I think you feel better. You feel a lot better about this offensive line going forward. But ultimately, John, to answer your question, I think they're a little bit better. They have a relatively modest ceiling, but based on the run that they've had the last couple of years, I'm not overly optimistic about, the future of this group.
Chris, sticking with the offense, I think the tight ends have kind of stood out in training camp. Obviously, Henry's been out the last day or so, but between him and Austin Hooper, it feels like you might get more out of that group this year. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I do. I think a lot of it hinges on Hunter Henry's health. If he can stay out there on a regular basis, and look, that's true for anyone, but a guy misses, a couple of practices in mid-August, starts to, raise some eyebrows a little bit. I will say this from a fantasy perspective, I'm not a fantasy guy, but from a fantasy perspective, Austin Hooper feels like a sneaky good pickup. And you guys have seen him work with Jacoby Brissett.
Yeah.
There appears to be a really nice connection there. And maybe some of that goes back to the fact that they both played in Alex Van Pelt's offense before. Maybe they've just, become buddies, whatever the case may be. But that's a good pairing. And I'm not saying that it's going to be, the return of Rob Gronkowski, but if you can get some production from a guy like Hooper at tight end, and then maybe you're able to kind of, maybe Jaheim Bell can give you some quality snaps. You do have a little bit of depth at that position, but it tight end, for me, it starts and ends with Hunter Henry. If he's healthy, you could feel pretty good about what you're going to get, or at least what you're projected to get at that position if you're the Patriots.
Yeah, and this is a tight end friendly offense, like most West variations of the West Coast offense are. And I think to your point, Chris, Hunter Henry's going to be a big part of their passing game. You need him to stay healthy. But the Patriots, it seems early on, are going to get a lot more out of that second tight end, the U, than they did last year with Mike Gesicki. I mean, Gesicki on paper looked like a good pickup, but he clearly didn't fit in. Of course, there were other issues with the offense last year. So in fairness to Mike, it wasn't all on him. But to Kevin's point, I think Austin Hooper is going to be a nice fit. And as we've seen so far in camp, this team is going to play 12, 13 personnel. They're going to use the tight ends a lot. It's going to be a big part of the offense. And so are the receivers. And, of course, over the weekend on Saturday, the Patriots releasing Juju Smith-Schuster. Two-part question here for you. One, were you surprised by that move? And two, do you have confidence in these young receivers now that they're going to get more reps, more opportunities? Do you have confidence in some of these young receivers that they could step up and play a bigger role this season?
I was a little surprised at the timing of it. I thought that they might try and hold on to him a little while longer to try and make a deal with another team. Although I don't know the particulars, this is just speculation on my part. Maybe they couldn't make that happen and they just decided to cut bait. The financial aspect surprised me because they still owe him a lot of money, or relatively, good chunk of money. That being said, I think it made perfect sense. When you look at this team, he wouldn't have made this team.
Yeah.
Juju Smith-Schuster wouldn't have made this final roster, no matter how you slice it, because you think, okay, you carry 6 wide receivers, you get the 4 locks, you get Bourne, and that depends on his health a little bit, but you have Bourne, you have Pop, and you have the 2 rookies. And then it's like 6 guys after that. And I don't think, given his age, his knee, and the fact he brings nothing to the table when it comes to a special teams perspective, you're not going to get, Juju Smith-Schuster wasn't going to play on this team, wasn't going to be a part of this team come Labor Day. So it didn't surprise me all that much. I want to have faith in these guys, but I just don't know until, the live bullets start flying. I like Polk. I think Baker has this wonderful, I don't give an F mentality about anything. My podcast partner, Chris Hogan, talks about, just be a problem. Just be a concern for opposing cornerbacks. Just do something to get them worried. And I think Baker has whatever that is. He's got a little bit, and I'll do the little tiny thing again. He's got a little bit of Steve Smith in his game, just in terms of the ornery kind of, again, that I don't give an F attitude. I think Polk projects to me to be the more consistent offensive presence, at least this year. An ability to make catches on multiple levels, a consistency that maybe we don't see all the time from Baker, although that's not a shot at Baker. It's just he's not kind of ready yet, I think. Professionalism. I really like Polk in the way he carries himself, the way he goes about his business, what he says, how he acts, the way he connects with Brissett and Drake May, and just, in his conversations with us, he's a really impressive young man. And so I think that if you want one of the 2 rookies, I think Polk is going to have a better year statistically than Baker. I think Baker's going to surprise some people from time to time and break out and have one of those, 6 catch, 90 yards, 1 touchdown kind of games. I think this passing game begins and ends with Pop Douglas. Now, I'm not breaking any news to you guys, but I think if he stays healthy, knock wood, over the course of the season, that you could project him to be a dollar store version of Tyreek Hill. That is undersized, quick, can do a lot of things to put pressure on an opposing offense. I want to see Pop Douglas in motion a lot. I want to see them try and hide Pop Douglas in the backfield from time to time. I want to see them, again, like I think one of the genius things that McDaniel does with Tyreek Hill is, he gets him in motion a lot. It's fine. It's tough to find him. And so I think that's one of the things that you could do with a guy like Pop. Look, I'm not going to put Pop in Tyreek Hill's class. Borderline MVP, one of the best players in the league. But I think you could use what Miami does with Tyreek Hill as a bit of a model for maybe some of the things you could do with Pop Douglas in the New England offense.
And real quick, I just wanted to follow up my question on Juju Smith-Schuster. I don't understand how they signed him. If they knew his knee was that bad, how do you sign him? Look, I think we all universally agree. Belichick dropped the ball with Jacoby Myers. He should have been back. You signed him. You developed him. They should have kept him. But that's revisionist history. But how do you sign a guy like Smith-Schuster with a knee that's in that condition? I mean, you mean to tell me that didn't come up when he took his physical 2 years ago? I just find that hard to believe.
Yeah, John, and someone in the press tent used this phrase the other day, and I thought it was appropriate with Juju. He's an old 27. And you go back and you look at his career, he's played a lot of football, and this is not a knock on him, but he's played a lot of football for a 27-year-old. Like he was a rookie at like 21, and he had great production, and he had some really amazing years. Just a couple of years ago, he had 78 catches for the Chiefs. And now, granted, you grade him on a curve because of Patrick Mahomes throwing him the ball, but still, he's had great production over the years. But he's an old 27. He's kind of aged a little bit like a running back, and the knee was just kind of part of it. I will say this about Juju, that, and you guys know this in the locker room, he could have blown it up at any time last year.
Yep.
He could have said something dumb. He could have complained about not getting the ball. And look, it's a low bar, but I think that when you consider what he could have done with that team last year and the fact that he kept his mouth shut and he had a couple of good games, especially against Pittsburgh, he played well, I think, against Pittsburgh. You go, okay, you know what? I understand. I do. I understand. But I think ultimately, maybe that's why they couldn't find a trade partner for him. Maybe the knee is still a thing. But again, a 27-year-old wide receiver who has had such a sharp decline statistically over the last couple of years and offers you no special teams value, the market is not going to be banging down his door.
Yeah, I mean, he could have been Devontae Parker, right?
Yeah.
Like Devontae was, and to both of their credit, they would always stand there and take questions, but there was always a twinge of, what's he going to say next time kind of thing. But jumping over to defense real quick, I feel like this is a big week, particularly tomorrow, for Christian Gonzalez. Mm-hmm. He's looked a little iffy, to put it nicely, during camp. And again, I know he's coming off the injury, but even today, he got burned on a pick play by Jalen Reagor in the end zone. So just your thoughts on, he's going to have a big matchup this week as well with A.J. Brown in town. Just some thoughts on Gonzalez and this week for him.
Yeah, I agree. I agree completely. I think it's a big week for that entire secondary, especially the younger cornerbacks. Gonzalez, I think we're all kind of waiting on it. And I think, Kevin, you bring up a really good point that he's, he had such a great start to his career, but he's been a little bumpy, honestly, over the course of the summer. And you say, okay, well, you know what? The lights are going to go on and he's going to, return to form. We haven't seen it so far. And maybe he does. Maybe this is the week where he kind of, shows his old self. I don't know what he's 22 years old, 23 years old, showing your old self. It's all a relative term, obviously. But I think it's a great question. But I think that I would love to see, I wish that Marcus Jones was healthy because I think this would be a good test for Marcus Jones too. I think I would love to see Jonathan Jones out there healthy. I would love to see, those cornerbacks on the guys on the defensive side of the ball. I don't have a lot of questions about a lot on defense, but the cornerback depth, we were sitting here at this time last year and it looked like they had cornerbacks for days. And all of a sudden, the fourth, fifth game of the season, Miles Bryant has to, deal with CeeDee Lamb because of injury. So you can never have enough cornerbacks. And I think we're going to get a real good sense as to where the Patriots are and maybe the cornerback depth that they have this week when you're talking about them going up against the Eagles. Maybe give Steph Gilmore a call. He's still out there. I know he had a meeting today, I think, with the the Vikings, who are a cornerback needy team. But, maybe you need a little depth there.
Yeah, and he wouldn't be a bad piece to bring back. A couple quick questions here before we wrap up, Chris. Just some thoughts on Jeremy Fowler's report this evening that teams have expressed an interest in trading for Matthew Judon. Kevin's been saying this now for a few weeks that he ultimately envisions this ending in a trade. Do you think that they move on from Judon? Do you think that they're so past extending him with the antics and everything that happened that they ultimately opt to move on from him?
I'll say this. If this goes on another week, then I think the only breaking point would come with a Labor Day trade, like a cut down day trade to whoever, Atlanta, San Francisco, as like a final piece of the puzzle type of guy. And I think the alternative is you sweeten his contract for this year. But there needs to be some sort of conclusion going into the regular season. The thing that stood out for me about Judon, on and off the record, no one has a bad thing to say about him around there.
Yeah.
And so, look, you take it with a grain of salt because everyone likes the guy, but it's going to be fascinating to see. And look, if I'm Matt Judon, I'm like, what the hell, man? Everyone else has gotten theirs. I love playing here. I love playing for Mayo. What's the deal? So it's the most fascinating thing that we've seen, other than the quarterback discussion. I think it's the most fascinating thing we've watched over the last, 3 or so weeks of camp.
Yeah, and I said that a couple of weeks ago where you can't blame him. I mean, they re-upped, 10 of his teammates, and he's sitting there saying to himself, well, wait a minute. I know I got hurt last year, but I know what my value is, and I know how important I've been to this team. At one point 2 years ago, you can make the argument that he's the face of the franchise post-Brady. Yeah. And here we are 2 years later now talking about whether or not the Patriots are going to pull a drop kick Murphy's and ship him out of Boston.
The one thing, and I can understand the level of anxiety coming from Judon because this is the last big payday of his career.
Yeah.
This is when he's going to cash in, and he's got to make absolutely sure. And look, I'm an advocate for players getting as much money as they can, as quickly as they can. This is his last big payday of his professional life, and so he's got to make sure this one counts.
Yep. Did you have one more?
Yeah, and I just wanted real quick, Kevin, you can jump in if you have one. Do you have one?
Yeah, just real quick. Overall, Chris, what's the most important thing you're looking for both tomorrow and Thursday night?
Offensive continuity, rhythm, a sense of timing, a sense that they're starting to kind of come along. And that kind of extends over the course of the year, honestly. Look, I think we're all under the, we're not under any sort of, preconceived idea that this team is a playoff team. I think what you want to see from this team, the expectation from this team, is steady improvement over the course of the year, where they're playing their best football in November and December, and then they're kind of going into 2025 on a high note. I think it starts really in a lot of ways this week, in particular on the offensive side of the ball, whether it's Drake May, Jacoby Brissett. I want to see them move the ball. I want to see them move it consistently. And I want to see, again, as we talked at the top of the show, I want to see how the kid handles a little bit of stress, when it comes to that Philadelphia Eagles pass rush.
And Chris, real quick before we let you go, we got a minute here. I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but I have to ask because we're going to be busy during the season. There's a good chance we'll be seeing each other all the time, but we may not get to connect on a podcast or our shows. How do you think they finish this season? I know that sometimes people don't like that question, especially this time of the year, but if you had to look into Chris Price's crystal ball, how do you ultimately see them finishing this season?
Well, my crystal ball is cracked because I said they were going to win, I think, 9 games last year. So,
you dropped it.
Yeah. My podcast partner, Chris Hogan, and I, we saw the 4.5 over under that Vegas had, 4.5 wins for this team. And we're going to print up T-shirts that replace "Do Your Job," and it's going to be "Bet the Over." I think this team, there's a path to anywhere between 5 and 7 wins for this team this year. I think the defense is good enough to steal a couple of games. I think they're going to win a couple of games straight up, matchup, personnel, whatever you want to call it. And then I think there's going to be a couple of games like the Buffalo game last year where they don't look like they're going to win this game on paper, but you get a great performance from someone. Look, this is a team last year that lost 8 games by 7 points or less. If they had any sort of competent quarterback play, let's say they win, 3 of those games? They go 7-10, and Bill Belichick is probably here. So I think that if they get the tackle position right, and if they get the quarterback position right, I think this team could be relatively, and I'm putting them a quote fingers here, relatively successful. Because again, the expectation level, you just want to be able to improve over the course of the year, go into November and December. Look, the 93 team, I think, is a great example. Where they went, 1-11 or something out of the gate with Bledsoe, and then they won like their last 4 games, and they were a wagon in December, and then they made the playoffs next year. I think that is a relatively decent model for this team to follow. If you can manage the expectations and get to 6 wins, I think that represents a successful season for this franchise.
Yeah, no, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and I'm glad you referenced 93. This has that same feeling. Bledsoe's rookie year, it kind of feels the same way. They took him number 1 overall. May, obviously, they took 3rd overall. They do have a late bye, so you could play him potentially after that bye. But this certainly feels the same way, and I tend to agree with you. I think that you definitely take the over, and I think it's a 5 to 7 win team. And look, there's some people that will say, I don't want the 7 wins. I want the top 5 pick, and that's fine. But 7 wins still gets you a top 10 pick. You could still potentially have that franchise left tackle. You can improve the roster, but you want to be competitive. You don't want to be living in the 2 to 4, 2 to 5 wins a year range. It's hard to get out of the bottom of the league once you're there.
I agree completely. And again, I think 5 to 7 wins, I think, is a manageable expectation. I think that's the level of expectation we should have for this team based on the talent, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. If they can stay healthy, if the important pieces are there, then I think that's a reasonable goal to attain.
Yeah, because, I mean, look, you hit rock bottom. That's how you ended up with Drake May. So now we start to climb up. Chris, I want to say thank you for taking the time, my friend. It's great to see you. And we'll see you tomorrow at joint practices.
Thank you, Chris.
Sounds great, guys. Take care, and we'll see you tomorrow.
All righty. We'll see you tomorrow, Chris. That is Chris Price from the Boston Globe. Thanks again, Chris. Appreciate the time. All right. You are watching the New England Football Show presented by Mortgage Right. I'm your host, John Sirianidis. As always, I'm joined by Kevin Stone, and we are going to pivot here and talk some college football. And Kevin, obviously, you have been spending a lot of time over at Boston College in recent weeks, the last couple weeks. Of course, they started training camp, 7-8 days ago, I believe.
Yep.
But obviously, you've spent a lot of time up at the Heights, and we talked about early observations last week. I was there on Saturday with you, and I think, look, when you look at this football team, I see a lot of what you see. And I know people will say, oh, here we go. Stone jockeying Boston College. He's Mr. Positive every year. And listen, I can be guilty of that with UConn. I was Mr. Positive going into last year with the Huskies. One thing I will say, and I do agree with you, there's definitely a good amount of talent there. They could potentially, especially if they navigate that first month of their schedule like we've talked about, they could potentially have a pretty good first year under Bill O'Brien. But I think, for me, when I look at this football team, I think it comes down to one thing. And I did my camp visit on Saturday, and after I finished it and published it, I thought to myself, I should have talked about the quarterback position more, because to me, this season for the Boston College Eagles hinges on Tommy Castellanos. If Thomas Castellanos does not end up fitting into that system, and he does not play at a high level and improve as a passer, this team is staring at 5 to 7 wins again, a lower tier bowl, and a typical Boston College season. If he plays at a high level, fits in the system, improves as a passer, 8 wins is a possibility. But I really, truly believe this season hinges on him.
I've been saying it since the end of last year. He needs to make better decisions, plain and simple, especially with Bill O'Brien and especially with Will Waring now at the helm. Now, I don't know how much you saw or heard Will particularly, but he is on guys' ass early and often for mistakes. There is a certain level of expectation now for this offense. And again, Will Waring is not messing around. So, and I continue to say this, and I'm not trying to fan flames for a QB controversy before we even hit Florida State, but they have a guy waiting in the wings that is a perfect fit. And you were on this as soon as Bill O'Brien was hired as well. Grayson James can step in and run this offense as well, if not better than Tommy. And I honestly believe that, even having not seen him play a real down for BC. Huge arm, He is athletic. He might not be as fast as Tommy, but man, he can run this offense just as well. So, and Tommy knows it. We've talked about this several times now. After the Fenway Bowl, he even acknowledged it. He was ready for a QB competition immediately after that game. So, I will say the only thing that's starting to worry me a little bit, and we're now 8 days in, is the offensive line. And now this just might be that BC defensive line is this good. And again, you've been on this as well. That front four is a menace. Cam Horsley, George Rooks, Okpala, and Ezeraku on each side. They're making life hard for this offensive line and getting pressure early and often in team periods. So they're scrimmaging Wednesday for the first time. Very curious to see how the offensive line holds up. And look, I think that unit's going to be good, but there's a few unproven guys there. Jude Bowery's unproven. Kevin Klein, unproven. Jack Conley, unproven. So they need to step up a little bit as well. But I personally think that the defensive line is just sort of making them look bad. They're that good.
But I do think, not to cut you off, I do think they have guys there, though. Hess, Alec, Conley. These guys have played a lot of football.
They have.
It's not too much to ask for a couple of them to step up and step in and start for you. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. That front in that Tim Lewis scheme is going to be a bitch all year long. They're going to be a problem if they stay healthy. Yeah. Tim Lewis is as good as any coach in football at utilizing speed rushers and doing a lot with them in terms of movement, TE stunts, zone pressure, zone blitz pressures. So I think they're gonna be a problem. All that being said, though, the guys you just mentioned, some of those guys have played a lot of football. You got to man up, step up, and take a job here, because you have Taylor back, you have Kendall back, you have Trapilo back. It's those two guard spots that they need to figure out. They have enough bodies there that they should be okay.
So Taylor's a little worrisome as well. He's still not participating. He hasn't played a down yet in practice. He was in a boot the first day. He's out of the boot. He's walking around, but hasn't participated. And we're, 3 weeks away from opening night. So that's a little worrisome as well. Look, when I say unproven, I'm saying consistently at an ACC level. You still have Ozzie and you still have Drew. Drew in particular is huge. Just, as a center, as the main sort of point of communication, I think he's going to have a great year. But those pieces, again, as a cohesive unit, there's some unprovenness, if that's even a word. It's probably not. But as a group, again, at the ACC level, there's still some stuff to work out there. And again, going up against this front four in practice every day does not help matters. So, again, very curious to see how it looks on Wednesday when the bullets are flying. But no, it's to go back to the original point. It's all on Tommy, and I'm not sure. I meant to bring this up to you when we were there the other day. It looks like they've changed his arm angle a little bit. He looks like he's more over the top, and his deep balls have been better. But again, decision making wise, he needs to be better this year.
Yeah. And let's shift gears here now and talk a little bit of UConn. Our Tony Catalina was at the Rent on Saturday for their in-stadium practice. He did our camp visit with the Huskies. And, we have a little bit of a quarterback competition there too. Of course, Joe Fagnano, Nick Evers, the transfer, highly touted transfer, comes into UConn. I think a lot of people thought that that's going to be your quarterback competition. But true freshman Cole Welliver is throwing a wrench into this. And based on seeing what Tony was talking about and just talking to a couple people, Cole Welliver's in the mix there. And look, it's hard for him not to be. I mean, you're talking about a kid who's 6'5", 6'6", over 200 pounds, and he could flat out sling it. Of course, he played for Jason Witten at Liberty Christian in Dallas. I mean, look, if I'm UConn, if I'm Jim Mora, Fagnano, obviously proven guy, knows the system. If he doesn't get hurt last year, he's your guy all year. Obviously, Zion Turner, Taquan Roberson leave the program because of the type of camp he had last year. Now he was playing, and they saw the writing on the wall. They felt that he was going to be the guy. Nick Evers, not as impressive as people thought, has had a good camp by all accounts, but he hasn't been as impressive, or he wasn't as impressive, I should say, on Saturday as people thought. But for UConn, they're in a different boat than Boston College in that they have a stud true freshman in the building that could potentially be the guy. If you're Jim Mora, knowing what's at stake, and they've had a hell of an offseason, we've talked about the work that they've done in the portal and beefing up the roster. But if you're Jim Mora, if Cole Welliver continues to develop at the rate that he is, do you play him over guys like Fagnano and Evers, two guys that are more experienced, although Evers hasn't played a ton of football, but they're more experienced? Do you play him over them? Do you say, you know what, the hell with it, he's our guy?
So I'll turn it around on you. As a coach, does it matter if the older guys in the room want an older player? Because my head immediately kind of went to that, where it's, do you want the experience heading into opening day against Maryland, correct? That's not an easy, it's not an easy start. Part of me says, go with the kid and see what happens. But on the other side, do you open up with that experience and sort of let the veteran lead the way until he starts messing up? You know what I mean?
Well, I don't think that the players care so much about the veteran piece. The upperclassman is going to have his supporters in the locker room. I don't think that that's what it comes down to. If Jim Mora, Gordy Samus, our offensive coordinator, the offensive staff, if they felt that Cole Welliver gives them the best chance to win, then he's UConn's quarterback. But to your point, and you bring up an interesting point, I don't think ultimately he ends up the guy, not to start the year. Now, I do see a scenario where he plays this year.
I think it's Joe.
I think it's Joe. I think Fagnano is their starter to open the year. I think he knows the offense the best. They're keeping a lot of what Nick Charlton did. They're going to run the football. They can play action with him. They can take some shots down the field. They can move the pocket for him. He's a nice player. I think that they're going to start the year off with some experience there. Let him be the guy, and it's up to him to hold on to the job. But I definitely think that Welliver is going to push. And in this day and age with the portal, and you know this, Kevin, you've got to play young players. You don't have the luxury anymore of sitting a young quarterback, especially a talented young quarterback. You don't have the luxury of sitting them for 1 or 2 years. If they're ready to play and you make that determination, they got to play. So I see a scenario where ultimately when the Huskies break camp, it'll be Fagnano. But I'm telling you, based on what I've talking to people and what Tony, saw on Saturday down there, and to a degree, we saw it a little bit in the spring as well. Welliver is impressive. And I would not be surprised if he plays sooner than later. Of course, Ivy League had their media day today as well. Brown, Dartmouth, Harvard, and Yale. I ended up live tweeting Brown. Our Adam Kirkchin live tweeted the other 3 schools. We're going to have stories up on what the coaches and players said between tonight and tomorrow. I know that Harvard's already up. We'll have the other ones up as well. Look, when the big theme going into this season in the Ivy League is the coaching changes. You have 3 new head coaches. Of course, the most notable one is Tim Murphy is no longer on the sidelines at Harvard. Andrew Orich is now the new head coach there. Of course, Coach Orich joined us a few weeks back to talk about taking over for Coach Murphy at Harvard. Yale and Harvard were your preseason 1 and 2 in the preseason Ivy League poll. When I look at the Ivy League, Kevin, I think it's wide open. I really do. And you could say that about this league most years, but I really genuinely think it's wide open.
I was going to say, we say it every week, and it's true. Look, I've had the pleasure of watching a few practices under Orich, at least during spring ball. And from an outside perspective, it looks and feels the exact same. Not much has changed. You know this. It's a defense and run the ball first team. Most Ivy League teams are, for that matter. I mean, it's a physical league, maybe one of the more physical leagues in the country, and it sort of gets overshadowed. Look, I think they're going to be good. The biggest thing to me, running back Shane McLaughlin was named the captain, and he's the first offensive captain since Ryan Fitzpatrick in 2004. So there's an emphasis this year, especially on new leadership and running the ball. Again, as always at Harvard. So I think they're going to be good. It's a matter of,
Yeah, him and Xavier Bascon are going to be a dynamic 1-2 punch for the
and
Crimson.
it seems like they have a 1-2 punch every year. We can go back to Bourget or Aaron Champlin. I mean, we've covered them all. So I think it's going to be a good team. But you're right. It's the Ivy League is wide open every single year, and it's going to be this year. Don't people can't sleep on Dartmouth anymore either. What Sammy did
No.
last year, I thought he deserved National Coach of the Year recognition. Frankly, for taking over in that spot and doing what he did. So I think Dartmouth is going to push this year. I was one of the voters for the Ivy League poll. I had Yale first and Harvard second, but I really debated on putting Dartmouth in that top three. It's hard not to. So, and don't sleep on Brown either. They had a monstrous offensive year last year, sort of faded down the stretch, but at least locally, the four Ivy League teams that we cover can all make a case of why they should have been in the preseason top, 3 to 5. So we say this all the time. I cannot wait to cover the Ivy League. It's the most entertaining football that we cover, probably besides the quote unquote big three that we have. So it's going to be a toss up. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Yale repeats again, or three-peats, I should say. What Tony Reno is doing from a consistency basis. And again, we talk a lot about the recruiting in the Ivy League. They're all recruiting the same type of kid, and yet he seems to find that upper echelon still. So I cannot wait to cover this league.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And Yale loses a lot, but you do bring back Joshua Pitzenberger. They do have a pretty good offensive line. Yeah, you got to replace Grooms and Tipton on the outside. But look, one thing about Yale is they've recruited well up front, so they're going to be strong along the offensive and defensive lines. They're going to run the football. They should have one of the better running games, not only in the Ivy League, but in the country. And they play a good schedule. And that's the thing. They're battle tested when they get into Ivy League play. You mentioned Brown. I mean, again, Brown goes 5-5 last year. And yeah, they did fade down the stretch, which has kind of been an issue the last couple of years, but you bring back Jake Wilcox. Offensively, you've got a stable backside by Stockton Owen. You got Ty Pezza, Mark Mahoney at receiver. Yeah, you got to replace Wes Rocket and Graham Walker, and those are big shoes to fill. But this is a program that is recruited well, both locally and nationally, like a Yale and a Harvard, to where they have guys that are waiting in the wings that could step up and certainly replace those guys. I expect all four teams in the Ivy League in New England to compete and be in it from start to finish, especially Harvard, Yale, and Dartmouth. I think Dartmouth's defense is going to be nasty. They're going to be physical. They're going to get after you. And in typical Dartmouth fashion, they're going to run the football. They're going to be opportunistic in the passing game, especially in plus territory. They won't turn the ball over. They just play smart football. And we're excited about covering the Ivy League. I mean, it's one of my favorite things that we do. I love the Ivy League. I'm an unabashed fan of the league, an unabashed supporter. The only thing you and I have always talked about is we want to see them in the FCS playoffs. At least,
I was just going to say, when do we have that rant again?
Right. At least get the league winner an automatic bid. If you don't want to add more than one, that's fine. But the fact that these kids don't get to play for a national championship, especially when you consider that when you go back to the turn of the 20th century, the Ivy League was the preeminent football conference in college football. Princeton has more national championships than anybody, including Alabama. And yet, you know what? Now, all of a sudden, these presidents with this thought process that academics first, you can have academics first and still compete for a national championship. I think it's silly that they don't at the very least get an automatic playoff bid. Just going around college football in New England. I was at Stonehill on Saturday for my camp visit. That piece will be up tonight. I got the roster yesterday from Doug Monson, so I'm just trying to add some finishing touches to that. Look, Skyhawks graduate a lot, but you do bring back quarterback Asher Karaha. He should be pretty good. They're in the NEC. Eli Gardner and his staff have done a tremendous job. They went 5-5 last year, 4-3 in the NEC. They graduate a lot. You lose a lot with Jermaine Corbett. Chris Darmer can't transfers to UT Chattanooga. You lose Sam Murphy. But this is a team, I think Gardner and his staff have done a terrific job in recruiting the last 2 years, and they've really fortified the roster. I think their running game is going to be as good with Xavion Woodward and Jarrell Washington. I mentioned Karaha. Passing game is going to be raw. They're very young at receiver. But this is a team that traditionally, when they've been at their best the last couple of years, It's because they've been able to run the football and stop the run. And I think the formula is going to stay the same for the Skyhawks. We will have our Matt Spalding will be making visits to Sacred Heart and CCSU as well. We're also going to get up to Merrimack. And, of course, we still have to get out to the Ivy League schools as well. And I do want to wrap up here talking a little UMass as well. Good camp so far for the Minutemen. Tyson Fomashon has looked pretty good in Shane Montgomery's offense. Look, I think, and I said this in the spring, and I've said it going into fall camp. Montgomery's the X factor for me. If UMass is going to take that next step and compete for a bowl spot, he's going to have to be the difference maker at offensive coordinator. We know what Puma can do when you allow him to be the playmaker that he is. And we know what Anthony Simpson can do. And I think Jalen John has really emerged as kind of their go-to guy in a crowded backfield. You have a veteran offensive line back. You have an emerging back. You have a talented quarterback, talented receiver. In my opinion, and you've talked about this a bunch, and I think it's so true, if their defense, because when we think UMass, we think Don Brown, Dr. Blitz, all that other stuff, if their defense gets back to the way they played in year one or slightly better than that, this team offensively could be sneaky good with Shane Montgomery calling the shots.
Yeah, just one real quick thing on Stonehill. The most impressive thing to me is since they made the jump, they've been competitive the entire time. You know, usually you have that sort of lull where you're a 1-win team, a 2-win team. They've made life hell for every opponent since they've made that move. So that's been impressive what Eli's been able to do. And we'll also be getting out to Holy Cross as well, too. Can't leave Dan Curran and the Crusaders out.
Well, I was going to mention them next. Of course, Media Day's on Wednesday.
Yeah.
And we'll be doing a camp visit with the Crusaders as well.
Look, as far as UMass, to me, they're in a normal excuse kind of boat, right? Like, it's all there. Braun has been there for, is this year 4? Year 3, whatever it is. The expectations.
Year 3.
The expectations are now well known.
Come on, we cover New England football, Stone. You should know that.
Look, it all blends together. The expectation as far as, you know, what the kids or what he wants out of the team, that's not a question anymore. So there's no more excuses for UMass. Now, granted, they were extremely unlucky health-wise at quarterback last year, but I keep going back to that opening game and how good Tyson looked. And I think they put up 45 in that opener. Like, they've added on offense. They got weapons outside now. So I expect them to be in bowl contention. Like, there's no more, well, if this happens.
I still think, and I know the UMass faithful aren't going to want to hear this. Here's my issue with UMass and the bowl conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see now, mind you, this is their last year as an independent. They're going into the MAC next year. It's a different conversation next year.
100%.
But as an independent, let's say they win 6 games and go 6-6.
Mm-hmm.
Is there going to be a bowl out there for them? Are they going to be an appealing enough program for a lower tier bowl to say, yes, we would love to have you come on in at 6-6. We'll take you. I think for them to get legitimate consideration for a bowl this year. Now, next year, I think 6-6 with the MAC tie-ins is different. But I think this year, you almost need to get 7 to really solidify yourself as a legitimate bowl contender. Now, the one thing I'll say is I would think that if UMass gets to 6-6, I would think that the fan base will travel. So that will make them appealing. They'll sell tickets. But I still think that it's UMass, and I'm not knocking them. All I'm saying is we believe in Don Brown. We believe in what they're doing. I think 6-6 should get them to a bowl. But just because I think it or you may think it, there might be that other program out there that may end up selling more tickets. They may have more of a history of consistent success lately. Might be a more reputable program. So 6 wins, believe it or not, may not get them to a bowl.
So I hadn't really thought of it that way. It's a good point. The first 2 things that came to mind when you were saying that is, one, we now have the Fenway Bowl. So there's an easy sort of backdoor there, to kind of appease that fan base. And my second thought was, well, UConn got one. Now, I know they're a bigger selling point just in terms of brand equity than UMass is, but I can't see the bowl committee not rewarding a Don Brown led team.
Well, it's not the bowl committee; it's a bowl itself that
a
has
bowl.
to right
So
there,
yes,
right.
the whatever bowl.
And I think you bring up a great point. I think Brown being the head coach would help that.
So I was going to say, I think just the story of him finally getting that program back to one would sort of sell itself. Now I know nationally that's not going to move the needle much, but I can't imagine if they earn that right, the story of UMass finally getting back to one wouldn't draw some bowl to say, hey, let's take them. But I mean, it's an interesting question. I will say, if that ever happened, UMass may burn to the ground because that fan base would just lose their minds if they earned it, but ultimately couldn't get in. I can't see, even again, a Fenway Bowl, a Pinstripe Bowl not taking them.
Well, it's not that easy though. It also depends on what conference tie-ins
Fair.
does the bowl have. Pinstripe Bowl does not have an independent tie-in.
True. So it's honestly, I hadn't thought of it until you brought it up. It's interesting. I can't. I feel like that story would draw enough attention where someone would want them.
But I think it's important to realize that I don't think that the conversation right now should be about them in a bowl. I don't think they're there right now. I don't think that they're going to be in bowl contention this year. Do I think that they could win 4 or 5 games? Yeah, the schedule's got some bumps in the road, but it's also manageable.
Yeah.
But based on what we're seeing in camp right now, and the way Fomashawn looks, and the way this offense is coming along, and Jalen John has really emerged in the backfield, I think that's going to be the key for me. They need to get off to a good start. You have Eastern Michigan, you have Toledo, you have some tough MAC schools early. They need to get off to a good start. They cannot afford to get off to another rough start, and then they're chasing games in the middle point of the season. They need a good start. If they're going to contend for a bowl, I think so much of it is going to be predicated on how they start, and that schedule, man, it's tough. You did mention Holy Cross, of course, as I said earlier. Media Day is on Wednesday. Our Tony Catalina is going to be there for that. Look, we know what they did under Bob Chesney, and there's still plenty of guys that were on those teams the last 2 years that are a part of this team. But I have no reason to believe, Kevin, that Dan Curran just can't keep the train rolling. I mean, you got Joe Pasansky at quarterback. You got Jordan Fuller back in the backfield. You got to replace some guys. You have Luke Newman back up front. You got to replace C.J. Hands and a couple of other guys. But there is enough talent, and we saw what Pasansky can do last year. There is enough talent with this Holy Cross team that there's no question in my mind that Danny Curran can keep this train rolling.
Yeah, don't forget about Justin Shorter at receiver.
Yeah, he's going to be the guy now. I mean, he was kind of second fiddle last year to Coker. He's going to be the guy now.
Yeah, but you brought up Joe. That's who immediately came to mind. That's a kid who was waited his turn when he got thrown into the fire last year in some legitimate must-win games. All he did was win on the road. So to your point, I'd be shocked if they're not competing for another Patriot League title. I can't imagine that team taking a dip. And knowing Dan Curran the way we do, him and Bob Chesney are very similar coaches. Their styles are different. Their deliveries are very different. Dan is the ultimate sort of he just sounds like a coach whenever he talks, but they have plenty of veteran leadership still. Yes, like you mentioned, they're replacing some of their bigger bodies, but they have, again, you mentioned Fuller, you mentioned Shorter, guys that have now done this 5 years in a row. Everybody knows what it takes, and again, you always joke. I speak often in hyperbole. I'd honestly be stunned if they're not in contention for the Patriot League title again and fighting for an FCS playoff spot. And just talking with them and kind of watching them throughout spring ball, they're carrying that chip on their shoulder, as they should. Again, this is a veteran team still. Yes, you're replacing a lot, but again, this is a team that doesn't have a graduate program. So these are guys that are going through their 4 years all the way through. I'm expecting big things out of them again.
Yeah. And of course, we're going to keep the fall camp visits rolling this week. I'll be at Bryant on Wednesday. I'll be at URI on Friday morning. We are planning on visiting with UMass again this weekend. Of course, this past weekend, we're up at UNH for Media Day. We'll be at Media Day for Holy Cross on Wednesday. You will be at Holy Cross the following week. And of course, We're also going to do our Ivy League visits as well. We're also going to visit Merrimack and catch up with the Warriors and see how they're doing. So busy couple weeks coming up. And on top of all that, high school football kicked off in Rhode Island, New Hampshire, Maine, and Vermont today officially. And it officially kicks off in Massachusetts on Friday, Connecticut this weekend as well. So, it's a great time of the year, an exciting time of the year. God's game is back. Greatest game on earth, greatest game in the universe. And let's go. Let's just go. Let's just go. I don't want to lament anything anymore. I just want to go.
If we were living in Hawaii, we would be getting ready to cover week 2. Their regular season started last week. That's crazy to me.
Yeah.
I had to throw that in there. But just 2 more things real quick. One, we will have a very special guest on Monday, next Monday, a week from tonight. I'm not going to review it yet, but make sure you are tuning in at 8 o'clock. You will not want to miss it. And again, we'll be at Gillette on Thursday night. Huge game against Philly. Ultimately, you'd like to think it's sort of the dress rehearsal since there's no longer 4 preseason games. But we shall see. But yeah, man, it's here. And we'll be doing our high school camp visit starting Friday, right? Probably.
Before we do that, we're going to have a bunch of high school content coming up for you. Of course, they're all stateless. Adam will be on that. We've got a bunch of polls coming for you this season as well. And we're going to have a bunch of high school stuff this week and next as well. So I know we've been Patriots, Boston College centric here the last couple of weeks, but hang with us, hang in there. That's obviously going to change now. We are truly going to be covering all of New England as best as we can. And I do want to remind people out there, if you're a freelancer that's looking to write in any of the 6 states in New England, we are looking for freelancers. We would love to have you. Send over your resume and your availability, and you'll either hear from me or Kevin, and we'll try to set up some time to talk to you and see if we can get you in the fold again. We know you have other options out there, but when it comes to covering New England football, we think we do it about as well as anybody. And we, like I said, we welcome applicants, specifically in Connecticut. We're looking to have a larger presence in Connecticut this season. We've been building towards it, but our goal is to cover multiple games a week in Connecticut if we can. So if you're a freelance writer in Connecticut, looking for an opportunity to cover some high school football and get some experience, if you're a young man or young woman, or if you're an experienced writer who's looking to get back in the game, again, just reach out to us. We're going to put out another tweet tomorrow. Shoot us an email or DM the New England Football Journal account directly. I run that, so I would respond, or DM Kevin. And, we'd love to talk to you, but we are definitely looking for folks. We're also looking for interns. If you're looking to intern and write, we could do that as well. Looking to build your resume. We're also looking for people to intern to do photography, to do social media. So again, we got plenty of opportunities out there. And one of the things that Kevin and I take pride in is we want to be a place that develops young talent and gives people opportunities to pursue their career and get that much needed experience as they go up the proverbial ladder. So again, if you're looking to get it, New England Football Journal is the place. All right, that'll do it for this week's show. Again, I want to thank Chris Price for joining us the first half hour in talking Patriots. As always, I want to thank my partner, Kevin Stone here. We will be back with you next Monday night with Stone's special guests. Until then, for Kevin Stone, I'm John Sirianides. Peace.
See ya.